Welcome. I'm excited to see you all here today. As Dr. Fujimura indicated, I'm Caleb Spencer. I was excited to see that we have so many deans supporting this. I used to teach in the MFA program here, so the arts are represented. I'm excited about that. I teach in the English department, so class is represented, and I teach in the Honors College. So I think I'm trying to see where the dean is of theology. I would like to teach for you if I can. Comprehensively covered going forward. Our guest today is somebody I'm excited to have us all hear from. He's an artist, an author, an educator, and a believer that I've long wanted to have at APU, and I'm so thankful for Dr. Mullen having made this possible. Before he begins his lecture, please allow me a few minutes here to introduce him and his contributions. I first met Mako over 20 years ago. We were talking about this today at an event at Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City. I'm actually not sure what year this was, but it was before Tim Keller had passed, and I was there with a group of people who were church planters, and at the time he was an elder at one of their sister churches. I met him there and knew him as a founder of the International Arts Movement, which I'll say a few words about in a moment. And he was just kind to me. I was a young graduate student and a college pastor, and I was teaching at the school, the Art Institute, and Art Institute of Chicago, I should say, and I spoke with him, and I remember thinking, like, this guy's really nice. But at the time, that was pretty much all I remember. So let me tell you a little bit about the International Arts Movement, which I went on to know a little bit more about later. They self-describe as a catalytic movement that is reframing how we speak of, affect, and nurture a new type of cultural conversation, and helping to infuse culture with a rehumanized microcosm of art, love, and beauty. Summarizing that, they say this: faith is vibrancy, not just orthodoxy. Brokenness, and this is my favorite one, is opportunity, not just tragedy. And beauty is necessity, not just nicety. Fujimura is the founder and the visionary here. His work as an artist, as a scholar, and an educator does all of these things: vibrant faith, brokenness as opportunity, and beauty as necessity. He graduated in 1983 with a degree from Bucknell University, and then went on to receive an MFA from Tokyo University, including spending time in their doctoral program in painting. He eventually moved back to the United States, and his art is currently in the collections of a variety of institutions, including the Huntington Library here just down the street. And he's had exhibits at the Tikhon Museum in Israel, the Sado Museum in Japan, and a number of others. In addition to that, Fujimura is an educator. He was the director of the Brehm Center for Worship, Theology, and the Arts, also just down the street. It seems like everything's in Pasadena, at Fuller Theological Seminary. And he's the founder, in addition to the International Arts Movement, of the Fujimura Institute, in which he works with a number of excellent scholars, including the psychiatrist and author Kurt Thompson and Esther Meek. He's the author of numerous books, including most recently Art and Faith, A Theology of Making, which I hope he'll address some of the themes in today. A wonderful book on silence by Endo called Silence and Beauty, Hidden Faith Born of Suffering from 2016, and then a book entitled Culture Care, Reconnecting with Beauty for Our Common Good. On all his hands, his work continues to remind us that co-creation with the Creator is the work of all humans. So I want to read just a quick quote from The Theology of Making to conclude. He says this: "In my experience, when we surrender all to the greatest artist, that artist fills us with the Spirit and makes us even more creative and aware of the greater reality all about us. By giving up our art, we are paradoxically made into true artists of the kingdom. Whether we are plumbers, garbage collectors, tax drivers, or CEOs, we are called by the great artist to co-create. The artist calls us little artists to co-create, to share in the heavenly breaking in to the broken earth." But Fujimura also knows that the world we labor in as broken people is itself broken. It breaks us and we break it. In Silence and Beauty, he reflects on Shisuke Endo's great novel Silence and his own trauma as a New Yorker after 9/11. And here's where Fujimura work interests me most. He insists that we see the brokenness of our worlds and selves, that we've lamented, and that we allow it to be broken. But he has the stubborn temerity to hope that out of that broken vessel can be forged a new whole. Please join me in welcoming the 2024 Hedges Lecture, Makoto Fujimura.
Thank you so much for welcoming us, both Hedges and I, to be here. And I was here quite a while back for an exhibit, and this time I'm not here with my art. So I'm going to give this lecture except for a surprise interlude. But I also want to let you know that my work will be amply presented by Pepperdine University Weizmann Museum starting in January. Andrea, who's the curator director, is on her way. Got stuck in traffic, as you know, that traffic. And so I hope you get to see my work, my art, where out of my studio, everything flows out of. I titled this talk, "The Shock of the New." In 1980, the Australian critic Robert Hughes did a series of PBS documentary on modern art and titled it "The Shock of the New." The 100-year history of modern art, its rise, its dazzling achievement, and its fall. The series covers art ranging from 1880 to 1980, from Picasso, Duchamp to Warhol. It was an effort to identify the new, the shock of the new, of modern art. More recently, in a New York Times essay, Jason Farago, who is another cultural critic, writes a critique of contemporary culture, calling it stale culture, and starts with Baudelaire, so to approximate Hughes' starting point. He states this is Farago. Baudelaire, Manet's great friend, articulated it in The Flowers of Evil. "Oh, death, oh, captain, it's time. Lift anchor. We are sick of this country. Death, let us sail to the depth of the unknown to find something new." To find something new, he continues. That was the imperative of modernism, not only in painting, but also in poetry, in theater, in music, in architecture, and eventually in the cinema. Hughes and Farago both make assumptions here about this word new. Critics tend to base their judgment upon what I argue as the shifting sand of that assumption. On the other hand, there are also those who oppose this progressivism and rely on older traditionalist hold on the sacred past, as if that is the only path to anchor the good, true, and the beautiful. Both of these positions, I am going to argue, are both progressivism and conservatism in very broad strokes here. But these positions assume something about the new that I want to speak to you about today. There are two words in Greek for the word new that I want to highlight today. One is neos, N-E-O-S, and the other is kainos. I wrote in my book, Art and Faith, Theology of Making, about these two words. I'm going to modify what I wrote for this presentation here. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, Paul states, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. Apparently, of course that will happen. Actually, the more accurate translation of this 2 Corinthians 5:17 apparently is, if anyone is in Christ, new creation. If anyone is in Christ, new creation. The word new here Paul uses is a Greek word kainos and not neos. But when we hear the word new, even this passage, we think immediately of something being improved, as in a new iPhone or a new car. Now, there's a Greek word for an improved device. That would be neos, from which we get the word neon. That new fashion, new technology, flashy and something that would illumine culture for only a short time. Kainos is categorically different from neos. I interpret kainos to be newness. It's akin to a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, but more. Yes, it is transformation, but it's more than that. It's transfiguration. I may even go further and say that kainos, in the way that Paul uses the term in 2 Corinthians epistle, is not just a new species, but a whole new concept of what a species is. Paul is describing how we are a new kainos creation as the resurrected Christ enters our lives. And when I speak of this kainos creation, this generative reality, I'm speaking of the potential that each one of us has in this room. Even in our ordinary days, whether we are religious or not, we are a portal of this kainos creation, the newness. I believe such potential is often whispered in the margins of human experiences, in the gratuitous, in the discarded, in the exotic voices of poets and artists and homeless, and those trapped in the scourge of generational human trafficking. Kainos can break out among the poor and oppressed, among those who mourn, and among those who are poor in spirit. All artists, again, regardless of their religious faith, all artists seek the new. But some can be trapped in the neos new. But great ones redefine what newness is. Baudelaire speaks of neos. Robert Hughes is speaking and describing this neos of modernism. Farrago is speaking of neos. But Rothko, on the other hand, anticipating the iconic style which he will be known for today, this book of his writings was republished this year. It came out in July. And I was privileged to write an afterword in response to what he's written. And in one of the passages of Rothko's writings, he uses the word plastic, but not in the materiality of what we know as plastic, but what he means by plastic is generative, some new way of painting. And he wrote this in 1940s, 10 years before he found his iconic style. He said, when you see a plastic one, which he means by generative expression. You seek amongst those that you know something like it, for it is a new creation. That is not neos, that is kairos. Kainos. The word kainos is used 44 times in the New Testament, pouring old wine into new wineskin. That's kainos, wineskin. A new commandment I give you, Jesus said, that you love one another. That is a kainos commandment. Behold, all things are becoming new, Paul exclaims. All things are becoming kainos. To his promise, look for new heavens and new earth, 2 Peter 3. Kainos, heavens, and kainos, earth. New Jerusalem, kainos Jerusalem. I will write upon him a new name, kainos name, for each one of us. And they sang a new song, saying, thou art worthy to take. They sang a kainos song. Kainos, kainos, kainos. The New Testament is a kainos testament, not neos testament. A new song. Anything that is enduring is a kainos song. A new poetry that is enduring is kainos poem. Any new art that is enduring is kainos art. But the question is, how do we live this out? How do we, in a world full of neos, how do we invoke kainos in our lives? First, there has to be a transformation or even a transfiguration of our hearts. Our hearts must be retrained to imagine a move away from this constant scarcity-driven flesh to a generative life, spirit-filled life that transfigures our hearts into the new kainos new. My mentor, Tim Keller, who was mentioned earlier, used to say to congregation full of Christians, have you invited Jesus into your hearts? And of course, many in the congregation will nod and say, yes, I have. But then he said, have you invited Jesus as your creator? As the creator? In order for us to have that transfigured lives and to create out of that kainos reality, we start by inviting Jesus. But then we realize he is the creator. We invite the creator, Jesus, into our hearts. And therefore, every opportunity, even every brokenness, becomes this opportunity, a Genesis moment. But who is this Jesus we are inviting? He is the post-resurrection, what the post-resurrection reality of Jesus tells us, the glorified Jesus. Right? After having suffered for all that he endured to take our sins upon the cross, resurrected into kainos creation. And if you struggle, as many artists does, this notion of the resurrection, because it is scientifically impossible, then you're actually getting closer to the fire. Jesus' resurrection to us is now and then was utter impossibility. And Paul, writing about it, does not pretend it to be anything less. It is, as the good Bishop N.T. Wright said, life after death. It is impossible in the neos mindset, but it is newness. In kainos mindset, it is transfigured new understanding of what a new is. Jesus could have come back as anything he desired. He was God, after all, he is God. But he came back as a human being. After going through all he went through as a human being, after suffering, after being tortured, mocked, and spit upon, he chose to be a glorified human being, fully alive. Not only that, he chose to be a wounded, glorified human being, fully alive. And it is by his wounds we are healed. Kainos newness begins by inviting this glorified, wounded human being into our lives and our making. The terios of God, the perfection that Jesus speaks of in Matthew 5, be perfect as your God in heaven is perfect. This is often translated as perfection, and we think of industrial perfection, right? Something that we must rise ourselves to become, to work hard, to be perfect. But that is, in a sense, to bring in this neos, newness, to our spiritual lives. But that's not the terios. That is not the end point that Jesus is speaking of. The end point is Jesus himself, the wounded, in a sense, imperfect end point. So how do we understand this? And how, more importantly, how do we live into this? And how do we create into this kainos reality? One example is here in this box. This is a box I designed to house this kintsugi vessel. Kin means gold, and tsugi means to mend. Japanese have taken this to a level of refinement and you can take a look at this later, but this is a 19th century rice bowl that was broken in half. And instead of fixing it, kintsugi master, who is a urushi master, Japan lacquer master, would often hold on to the fragments for many years. Sometimes would pass it down for especially important teaware that has used in an important tea ceremony. Oftentimes, if something like that, of that value breaks, it is passed down for generations in time of beholding, of thinking about the value of that vessel for many years and is given to a kintsugi master finally. And it will be not just fixed, or really not really fixed, it's mended, because the kintsugi master will look at the fragments, each piece, until that piece, that imperfect piece, becomes beautiful in itself. And then, by mending it with Japan lacquer and gold, the kintsugi master accentuates the fracture, creates a landscape, a river of gold, in the fissures, and thereby making the tea-ball, which might have been pretty valuable to begin with, more valuable at the end, because it has been through two masters, one that created it and the one that created kintsugi design out of it with gold. Hedges, my wife, and I have been on this journey, as some of you saw the new creation film earlier, into India and beyond. And we have been on this kintsugi peacemaking journey. Kintsugi peace is a word that has been coined to talk about this act of carrying this principle into some of the darkest areas, realms of human experience. And to showcase that, we have a short film that we're going to watch. This is done by Wind Rider production team, partner with Sundance Film Festival. And this was taken in the 2 years ago in India and edited for our purpose here. What happens when the light breaks in is that world that we assume to be normative gets turned upside down. It's an opportunity to look through the fissures and say, oh, finally I see the light, not because it is perfect, but because it is imperfect. Japan as a culture is at the end of Silk Road. So everything flows from India to Japan. Everything that Japanese artists look to do in defining Japan originated in India. The relationship between what the women are wearing here in the slums and kimono of Kyoto. They're both extravagant.
I describe India as a very beautiful and complicated country. It has such a long, rich history of beauty and such a long history of oppression.
Kin means gold, and tsugi means the men. And instead of hiding the flaws, they accentuate it with gold. And so the end result of a kintsugi bowl is more valuable than even the original. In that sense, kintsugi is also deeply, deeply connected to the cultural reality of India.
It's not broken because it broke itself. Something happened to the vessel, but there's hope because it can be mended. Kintsugi has the power to have a common language for the most vulnerable to the most powerful.
I understand that in Indian culture, it is, you throw away broken things, right? Yeah. So that's really a good place to start.
We decided to bring Kintsugi peacemaking to India because whether it's the boldness of beauty or the boldness of trauma, it's kind of in your face. You see slums everywhere. You see the wealth and the poor, kind of every other block.
You are kind of pushing against this notion in this Kintsugi experience. What you're doing with your hands is actually to liberate yourself from that notion that you are limited by who you are, where you were born, that you are imperfect, that you have chips and brokenness. I do.
India suffers from the highest rate of sex trafficking and human trafficking in general. A very conservative number of human slavery is about 40 million people. And that is the largest number in human history. Out of those 40 million, approximately 27 million are in India. Most of people, if not all, who are trafficked are from the poorest communities. So I wanted to bring Kintsugi to those who are doing frontline work. We brought it to trauma-informed counselors, we brought it to the teachers that care for children who are from the red light area.
By bringing Kintsugi to India, in the slums of India, we are able to behold the brokenness of all that modern civilization has caused in the slum areas. I mean, that is just the natural result of us pushing away imperfections and the imperfect and the garbage that we produce so that these slums are created out of the refuge of our lives. Generations after us will sense as their fracture, the impact will be felt 200 years from now. When the tea bowl breaks in Japan, families of tea masters will hold on to the fragments for several generations. They tell of the story of the fragments. Several generations, they learn to behold the pieces, and they do so until the pieces themselves, the fragments themselves, become beautiful. And then it's given to a Kintsugi master. And that master will mend with gold to make the fissures and fragments, the in-between spaces, come alive. And that process is generational, as our process is generational. As much as we want to fix the world, God is calling us to a long journey.
How do you glue it?
How many of you, and raise your hands, brought something that was completely broken? Completely broken, not just chipped, but broken in half?
I was experiencing the healing that I didn't know I needed.
Gray part and a white part.
Yeah.
You want both about even.
By the time that you are finished, we want you to come up with a name for your piece.
When it broke into over 20 pieces.
And then you're going to start to sing.
You don't want to cut it so we lose it. I would do it like
These hairline fractures, like we don't notice them. When you first pick it up, you don't even notice them. You think it's perfect. And then when you're pouring coffee, sometimes you can hear it. I'm a survivor of 9/11. I lived 3 blocks away, and I was underneath. And same thing. I don't see the hairline fractures. Sometimes, I think I'm over it, or but it's still there.
There was a piece inside me which was missing, which felt like
Family is not in a good shape. One of my sons, it's very hard, our relationship.
yes, I was also broken.
Say something very strong is holding everything together.
There is so much pain.
Family, it's most important. Recently we lost our sister. We've gone through a terrible time.
I named my piece Otu-san, which in Japanese means dad. I just lost dad a few months back. Not many people know. There's so much between my dad and me that had happened that was not pleasant. I always felt bad that it ended that Sa. So while I was applying the putty, I truly felt, that those were the cracks of healing and closure that I needed with my dad. I just sat staring at my piece for 5 minutes, like, God, this still feels incomplete with just the putty on it. I want to clear the putty. I don't want to see that putty anymore. And the more I kept applying the urushi glue to it, God kept telling me, I am your father. And I will cover it, I will fill it, and I will always let you know that I am there. That's why I named it Otu-san, because it is a combination of my earthly father who I lost and my heavenly father who I'll see soon.
Wounds matter, fragments matter. When that person sees him or herself as beautiful, that's when the work of justice is done. Then that begins a whole another generative track in society where that person can make impact in ways that we cannot even see right now. And out of this paradox comes new creation. Bringing kintsugi to India, and especially in the slums of India, where we certainly don't expect healing right away, or even joy, I suppose. At least by faith, I could see it, that the light will shine into the very dark places.
Nobody's perfect. Nobody's without trauma. So if we can all see ourselves as broken with this possibility of being renewed and made into new creation, that's where the light is gonna shine through because of the brokenness. If kintsugi peacemaking can speak what is true, good, and beautiful in India, I know it's possible in other places too. It is not about getting rid of what is broken or fixing it even, but it's about creating something new out of that time, out of that fracture.
If we can start this little seed of kintsugi peacemaking now, I think it will grow into something that can make an impact. What is something that is most painful, that is most traumatic to us today, that pain will be gone. But the wounds will become the fracture through which God's light, God's gold will be flowing into the world. If the risen Christ bears the nail marks and his pierced side is now a portal into kainos, creation, new creation. But what about us? What about our wounds? Paul has a suggestion. He said, in my weakness, God is perfect. 1 Corinthians 15, he said, what is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a physical body. It is raised a spiritual body. In a stunning new book, just came out, Perfect in Weakness, New Zealand theologian Maya Whitaker states this in explaining her retention view, what she calls retention view, that affects all of us, but particularly to the disabled community. A possibility that radically change how we view our bodies. She writes in response to the above 1 Corinthians passage in a chapter, Personal Identity Across Life, Death, and Resurrection. She writes this, that is where our pre-resurrection selves are perishable, they will be raised imperishable. Where there is dishonor as we reveal our only glimpse of glory, we will be transformed to full glory. Where there is weakness, it will be transformed to power. Where our bodies are oriented toward and controlled by the sinful nature, they will, post-resurrection, be oriented and controlled by the Spirit. The new creation is ex vetere, not ex nihilo. It is likely that the element of continuity will include embodiment, aesthetics, mathematics, agape love, and some kind of temporality, but the moral and natural evils will be cut off. My dear friends, I have good news. What you are doing here at this university, what you are teaching and what you are learning, what you're serving, whether it be art, biology, business, mathematics, nursing, theology, or plumbing, you are sowing into the imperishable, creating into the new. You are in the business of raising a new kainos creation, a kintsugi kainos generation. If we are to live out our calling, then creating beauty and giving mercy, if you love well, you are creating a portal into the new creation. It is God's invitation for us to co-create indeed. Further, it is only on this side of eternity that we can be part of sowing into the future reality of the new. It is only on this side of eternity that we can share the love of Christ. We can administer mercy, that we can create into the new. And then God will somehow take those seeds, foundations, and turn them into this reality of new creation. As I write in my book, God could do this without us, but God chooses to wait until you and I make, to bring that into new creation, to act, to transform, to transfigure not only us, but the world around us by simple mustard seed of faith. They are the building blocks for the new. Somehow, I don't understand this fully. But God is waiting for us this day to act upon our faith, to create into the new. As it turns out, even if we are building sandcastles on the beach that will be washed away by the waves, but if we do that in faith, the great architect will great love for us, a Father who cares about what we make and will cherish that, will somehow turn that into a permanent grand mansion for the feast to come. Everything matters. Every second counts. It is Kainos wounds. It is in Christ's body and his wounds that we find healing. The portal is in the imperfection, the scarred, and the poor, the wretched, and even the disabled. Think about that. Think of how much the world would change if our community embraces the imperfection toward the teleios of Christ. Think of how much it will change how we view what we do, what we learn, how we care for each other. If the goal is to love, today, there's so many ways that you and I can affect and pour gold into the fractures of the world all around us. Finally, I want to mention one writer who has had a profound effect on me. She's not a Christian, but I want to prove to you how these thoughts are already being carried into the world that I know well, completely broken, fed of egos and shark-infested waters. There are a few voices that I think are critical for us to find kintsugi grace. And that writer was Susie Gabelich, who recently passed away, who turned out to be quite a secular prophet of the art world. And she wrote about imagination and when that was not cool. And she stated this about the naos reality of art, which we are obsessed with today. She wrote this: once art began its relentless advance into traditionlessness, every new style served as a new beginning, a new plunge ahead. Beliefs had to be continually changed, replaced, discarded, always in favor of newer and better ones, which will be rejected in turn. The new became the chief emblem of positive value. Being an artist, in the words of Joseph Kosup, means questioning the nature of art. If you make paintings, you are already accepting, not questioning, the nature of art. Susie completes her thoughts here. But when the early modernists failed, what the early modernists failed to foresee in their dedication to the new was that such a conception of history could only be built on sand, since no belief ever had anything solid to support it. Gabelich here thereby critiques the naos of art, but actually I think same time gives us invaluable insight into how contemporary art, even on this side of eternity, may see kainos expressions. Most artists, as well as critics, will not see kainos as welcoming, because it violates the rules implicit in the art world, which is to question everything, trust nothing. You are alone on the island of despair as an isolated humanity. Modernism has atomized us, and post-human world of technology now has decimated us with our souls in purgatorial regret of both the lack of tradition on one hand and a tenuous foundation of sand, or maybe bananas taped on the wall. We can only create naos moments, here today and gone tomorrow, or rile against it as a baseless reality and lament. But we can also build on solid yet liquid foundation of the kainos new, the new Jerusalem, kainos Jerusalem, paved with pure gold. Now, only an artist or a material scientist will know this. If you read Revelation and you read the streets of paved with pure gold, I know, because I use gold, that pure gold is liquid. We will walk on water, on pure gold. But now, because of all the fissures and bombs going off in Gaza and Ukraine, because the house is divided, we are ready to see finally what kainos reality could look like. Yes, what is sown in weakness will be raised in power. Kintsugi kainos can break in because of the interactable reality of today. Golden foundation that all of us can walk on and build on must be seen. And artists may be the first to see that, because it takes courage to create. We will not see kainos by avoiding the pain, the fissures, fragmentations, and divisions. But our work begins by beholding the broken pieces, fractures, and in those pieces, terios, perfection of beauty. We behold the fragments, sometimes for generations, until we see them as worthy of the ultimate true kintsugi master. That is the terios of Christ, the wounded, glorified Savior. When our communities, this university, and our art become a mosaic of broken beauty, full of disabilities, imperfections, fragments, or even divisions, because of this God who pours grace into the fissures and brokenness, we are to become finally the artwork of God. We are God's poema, Paul says in Ephesians 2:8-9. We are God's poems. We are God's masterpieces of our kintsugi journey. Thank you.
I have a question about sort of the one thing you mentioned about the modern technology.
Yep.
When you say the word generative or when you say new,
Yes.
what comes to mind is all the newness that has been talked about in terms of the artificial intelligence. So it's a weird question, but what do you think is the generative, like where does generative AI fall in terms of the neos versus the kainos, if it makes up
It's a great question. My brother is the expert. I'm an artist. My brother is the deep learning expert. But from what I understand and what he tells me, generative is not a good word for what's happening. Now, there's mystery to what is happening now because of complexity. And also AI is a misnomer. It's not intelligence. Deep learning is not the right term for this. These are problematic because words matter, right? And poets know this. What's happening is pattern matching, and extremely complex pattern matching that the machines can do so well. And so it is not generative in that sense. It is simply creating overlaps in zillions of data and matching them to create a cohesive, linear way that we can understand. But the machines don't really care about generativity or singularity, even though it is driven by certain ways that it's been coded by people who have assumptions about faith in technology. Okay, so all that to say, to me so far, all the signs are that it's all nails. And if you followed all the hype that went into generative art and NFTs and so forth, it's kind of gone now. People who benefit millions of dollars worth of benefits there is now painting. That tells you a lot. It's just painting with paint, with real paint. So these may be, a lot of it may be fads. We should be careful how we assign permanence and something that is enduring. Our world is full of promises. If you're an art student here, you should look at art news from 5 years ago. What was celebrated then has disappeared. And in the days of Instagram and TikTok, you can probably do that 5 months ago. So naos is very much dominant. And whenever we talk about culture or even technology, we should understand that this maybe just turns out to be one of the fads and one of the new ways of creating something. Now, but I also believe in technology. My father was a scientist, a renowned researcher, and I grew up in the famed Bell Labs community, where a lot of this, head of Google Analytics in language is my father's student. And so I grew up hearing about all that is happening in technology and the promise of it. And so I'm excited actually about the possibilities that we can create something new, kainos new, using a very rudimentary form of pattern matching. It's only going to improve. So, by the time that, somebody in middle school is now, it will be coming here to this university, first of all, that child will know more about this technology than any of us. So there's no use in teaching. We are going to be learning from these kids. But what they don't know how to do is how to work together, how to collaborate, how to problem solve in teams, how to create a team to do that. So our education will shift. art will shift. A lot of these derivative works, what could be called converging tasks of illustration and design, could be easily replaced now by Adobe. Now, is that a threat to art? Maybe, if you think nails is the art, and these what we are teaching in art classes is only the technique, then it can be replaced. Now, somatic touch has such deep complexities that I don't think you can ever replace somebody learning to sketch with a pencil. I may be proven wrong, but that reality of our senses, our eyes and our touch, are the two of the most complex data that and also interpretation that we can have. So I think it's a while before we should be worried about that. My brother said to me once, because I asked him 5 years ago, should I be worried, as an artist? And he said, oh, no, you have nothing to worry about. What you do is like this nebulous, abstract stuff that is like so, so finely attuned, and you use like 17th century materials, pulverized minerals like that refracts rather than, and he was like, no, the machines can't do that, they won't be able to, in your lifetime, you have nothing to worry about. And he said, and he's not a Christian, he said, you have this thing called faith. That's crazy. There's no way the machines can replicate your faith. So interesting, right? So I thought about that a lot, and I thought, well, and first of all, these terms, I think we should maybe, it should be a whole bunch of us who care about words to start identifying, misused words like artificial intelligence, and replace them with something else, and then really think about what's possible now that it wasn't possible a few months ago, with technology. We should be ahead of the game. We should be, talking to these geniuses, in garages that, come up with these innovative solutions without having an ethical and spiritual reality that would allow them to create something more enduring. And I think that's the invitation, is that schools like this, we should be really shouting from the rooftops that humanity cannot exist without understanding our souls. And if we continue on this path of assumption, as in Naos knew, then we will very quickly get to a end point, where everything is going to be replaced so quickly that the moment you create anything will be completely, thrown away the next moment. That time is coming. So what is going to last more than a few weeks? What is going to last a few months? What is going to last a few years? What is going to be, that Starry Night painting that we will be looking at several generations, several hundred years from now, and saying, oh my goodness, this is new. This is kainos new. This is something that every time I look at, something is birthed in me, and something is birthed in society. So those are kind of talking points.
I loved your presentation. As I was listening to you talk about kintsugi art and what took place with those broken pieces that were carried, and the way in which those were carried and then finally brought back together, I couldn't help but think that part of that new, that Christian new, is the re-enchantment that comes through narrative. Yes. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, if you could. How important is the story that then kind of, I think about things like how can clothing become enchanted, which is really tough, right? But
Yes.
Is that part of what you're seeing taking place in terms of like a deeply Christian understanding of?
So I didn't get to go into Susie's way of addressing it. She wrote a book called The Enchantment of Art. And I think that's where she becomes very prophetic to your question. And yes, I think all genres, fashion, design, illustration, has to begin to capture that kainos newness, because machines can do nails. So we really have no choice, you know. And so how do we educate the imagination, the, you know, what I call sanctified imagination? How do we grow in ourselves sanctified imagination, and perhaps more importantly in an institution like this, how do you help younger generation capture something that, you know, we can't see, you know, where we need to see visions and dreams, and we haven't been a good steward of visions and dreams in the church, especially. And I think this is where I don't use the word intentionally Christian, you know, newness, because I find evidences of this newness and fruitfulness in so many other places. But we haven't paid attention to it. Now it's up to the Christians who understand grace to interpret them. So that's what I'm doing with Susie and Rothko, is I bring them into the stage, let's say, of grace, where God can only open that up for us and reveal what is the future. Whereas people who are not cognizant of perhaps grace fully may not be able to see how that, what they are talking about, can be applied generatively to create this realm, ecosystem of sanctified imagination. And that's what I hope, you know, that followers of Christ in creating communities can do. But I have found that as an artist, it's not very helpful, unfortunately, to go to the institutionalized church with sets of checklists to find imagination. And I'm a part of the church. I'm passionate about church planting, but one of the things that I found is that reality of fruitfulness may come from places that are so far beyond what I imagine fruitfulness is. Just like in Mumbai, in Tibet, where these children, right, tell me what generative reality may be. So those are some thoughts.
What would you say a new newness would look like for Japan? Would it be separated from the traditionalist meanings, and would it also separate from the long-established culture of specifically nuclear power and reliance on America?
Yeah, I love the breadth of your question. You know, and actually, this is a great example of newness breaking out in a place that is least expected, perhaps. Japanese history and culture, with persecution history of 250 years of, you know, dictatorial persecution of Christian. You know, more than any other religion, they have systematically eliminated Christian faith. But a tea master in 17th century, Senno Rikyu, if you study his work, has created this indelible form which outlasted Tokugawa shogunate, these dictatorial forces, and outlasted nationalism to create an egalitarian way of appreciating beauty in each other and beauty in nature, connecting nature with culture, which is, to me, one of the missing pieces of the Western Christianity. So, I think God has hidden the gospel in Japanese culture. I think it is one of the places that we can find examples of this fruitfulness that we may not find anywhere else. It's a very unique refinement. I agree with you about nuclear power and a country that was decimated by nuclear power, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, should not be relying on GE, American power plants, to put it in the earthquake-prone land. It makes no sense to me. I agree with you. When after 3/11, I did a series of paintings, one of which you will see at Pepperdine, called "Walking on Water," grieving and lamenting over what was happening and the ongoing crisis that still is going on, the meltdown in Fukushima. And I walked around that area, not too close, but walked around the area and found out that all these companies came together, Hitachi and Sony, and these companies have been trying to create wind power in the offshore. So far, nothing substantial, but I felt like if tragedy can bring these companies together, then that is a generative possibility. And I hope more, Japanese companies, they're so good at refining technology. They should be able to come up with something because of the tragedy. Again, if you don't face the reality, if you continue to be reliant on these technology that is not meant to be for Japanese. There's some 73 nuclear power plants in Japan. Is that right? It doesn't make sense to me. It's an island size of California. I realize we need energy, but it has to be done in a way that makes sense. So I don't know if that answers your question, but thank you.
All right, will you join me in thanking Makoto Fujimura?